CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: 2 people killed as Russian missiles hit a hospital in Ukraine in another night of airstrikes across the country. Our other headlines: China's Ukraine envoy arrives in Moscow for the latest round of talks aimed at trying to end the conflict.
I'm at Heathrow Airport, where passengers are facing chaos due to tech issues.
And snoozing through Europe, a new sleeper train service is launched linking Berlin to Brussels to try to offer an alternative to flying. Two people are reported to have been killed and at least 15 others injured in a Russian missile strike on a hospital in Ukraine. Children are among those injured in the attack on the clinic in the city of Dnipro. Russia says its troops targeted ammunition dumps, but Ukraine's President Zelensky described those responsible as terrorists. It follows a night of heavy shelling across Ukraine, with strikes hitting the capital Kyiv, as well as the city of Kharkiv and the wider Dnipro region. Kyiv says more than 10 missiles and 20 drones were shot down. China's mediation efforts to end the Ukraine conflict are continuing, with its special representative arriving for talks in Moscow. Li Hui has been meeting Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. It's the latest stop on his European tour aimed at finding a diplomatic solution to the 15 months of fighting, and follows meetings last week with Ukraine's President Zelensky. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, in Moscow. Stuart, what more can you tell us about this meeting between Foreign Minister Lavrov and China's Li Hui?
Well, it'll be familiar territory for Li Hui because he was China's diplomat, China's ambassador to Russia during the President Medvedev years, and so he's here as the last stop on his European tour to get a sense of the Russian position after we've already had, and the Foreign Ministry has responded to China's position on the situation in Ukraine. Now it's time to hear from people directly and try to gauge what could provide some kind of pathway to peace. Now, based on previous statements of the Special Representative, we've got an assessment that one of the priorities is the need for trust. Trust, in turn, could lead to talks. Talks could lead to a cessation of hostilities, and then there may be a permanent way to solve this crisis. But so far, there has been certainly uncertainty about whether there's room for even that trust, the first step required, because Ukraine has insisted that it is still intent upon, quote, fully liberating its territory. And that, of course, includes Crimea, something that's a complete red line for Russia and remains that way. And the Kremlin earlier this week has provided no sense it's willing to budge. It says it still wants all of its objectives in Ukraine to be fulfilled, whether that requires military force or other means. Now, in terms of the latest, we heard from Dmitry Medvedev, former president of Russia, earlier in the day. He suggested that he saw this conflict potentially going on and off, hot and cold, every few years, suggesting fighting could take place, a ceasefire might be arranged, and fighting would start again. Now, that's not actually Russian official policy. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Kremlin say they're both completely opposed to that. It's either continuing the fight or wrapping it up completely.
United States diplomats in Russia have been summoned over a briefing given by their national security advisor.
Yeah, that's right. We don't know exactly the comments the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is referring to here, but there's a good sense that it relates to comments made by Washington about whether Ukraine is allowed to use US weaponry to, quote, liberate its territory, which would include Crimea. Now, of course, Russia doesn't believe Crimea is Ukrainian territory, and so the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs here says the US is providing equipment to help Ukraine attack Russian territory, i.e. Crimea. They also suggested it was being used in Belgorod as well. So that's why the ambassador has been summoned, although I wouldn't expect any change in position from the United States on this one.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Supporters of Serbia's President Alexander Vučić are travelling from across the country to join a rally in support of his government. It comes after recent protests in Belgrade that demanded his resignation following 2 mass shootings in May that shocked the country. Our correspondent Alyosha Milenkovic reports.
Serbia of Hope is the official name of the pro-government rally that is gathering thousands of supporters from across the country. Those working for state firms were told to take the day off to attend the event. The pro-government media are promoting it as the biggest gathering in Serbia ever and announcing a string of public figures in attendance. The main speaker, Serbian President Alexander Vučić, says that he will address the public, but not as the president of the ruling Serbian Progressive Party or the SNS, but as the president of the entire country. Vučić told reporters his speech will show the exit path from the current situation, referring to the state of shock the country is feeling after the mass shootings that left 18 dead, including 9 children who were killed when a 13-year-old opened fire at a Belgrade school. The opposition is accusing the ruling coalition of creating the conditions for the mass shootings by influencing young people with a culture of violence and failing social values. Opponents point to Friday's rally as another example of Vučić stirring up divisions. But many public services across the country have been cancelled, with public transport in Belgrade either severely disrupted or in some parts non-existent. Alyosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Belgrade.
And we're just getting some developing news from Serbia. President Alexander Vučić has reportedly placed the country's army on full combat alert and ordered his units to move closer to the border with Kosovo. That's after Serbs in northern Kosovo fought with the police, who were assisting the newly elected ethnic Albanian mayor enter his office. We'll have more on this story in the next hour or so. Voters in Turkey head back to the polls on Sunday for the presidential runoff. President Erdogan hopes to extend his rule into a 3rd decade as he goes up against the country's main opposition leader. Our correspondent Mikhail Bardavid reports.
Both candidates, Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, scheduled rallies in Istanbul, the country's largest city, just 2 days out of the critical runoff vote. Neither managed to pass the 50% threshold needed to win in round 1 on May 14th, where the race was tight with about a 4% advantage to Erdogan. Both leaders are offering contrasting visions for the future of Turkey. Erdogan says the country is at one of the most painful crossroads, while Kılıçdaroğlu has stressed it's the last chance to save democracy. Erdogan is looking to extend his 20-year rule. In 2018, he gained sweeping powers under a new executive presidency. The opposition has vowed to return to the parliamentary system. Kılıçdaroğlu's Nation Alliance has also pledged to reverse other policies placed by Erdogan, such as his unorthodox economic plans over interest rates. Erdogan supports cutting interest rates in hopes of lowering inflation, but Turkey's inflation reached a record 85% in October, and last month it was over 43%. Kılıçdaroğlu wants to send Syrian refugees back home within 1 year, saying they pose a threat to national security. Erdogan has received the backing of nationalist third-place candidate Sinan Oğan, who received about 5% of the votes, while the opposition's Kılıçdaroğlu received the endorsement of the Victory Party, which received about 2.2% of the parliamentary votes. The latest polls show Erdogan slightly ahead of his opponent, yet the polls mostly fail to predict the outcome of the first round. I'm Mikhail Bardavid for CGTN in Istanbul.
Torrential rain has turned roads into rivers along Spain's Mediterranean coast. Rescue operations are underway in some of the worst affected areas. Heavy rain warnings remain in force for the province of Castellón in the Valencia region. While the rain has caused widespread damage, it's been welcomed by some after a prolonged drought. Japanese authorities have arrested a man suspected of murdering 4 people in a shooting and stabbing incident. A woman and 2 police officers responding to the incident in Nagano were among those killed. The suspect barricaded himself into a building in a 12-hour standoff with the police. Shootings are rare in Japan, where gun ownership is tightly regulated. The suspect had a license for a hunting rifle. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Europe's busiest airport sees flight cancellations, an IT meltdown and industrial action.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
This week on Razor, solving two problems at once by sinking an invasive seaweed into the deep ocean to lock away carbon.
All seaweeds, as they grow, photosynthesize, and that means that they can be really handy for carbon absorption. And what we think we can do is sink the sargassum into the deep ocean and remove that carbon that it contains from the fast carbon cycle.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. 2 people killed as Russian missiles hit a hospital in Ukraine in another night of airstrikes across the country. Our other headlines: China's Ukraine envoy arrives in Moscow for the latest round of talks aimed at trying to end the conflict. Travel woes continues for passengers at Europe's busiest airport. London's Heathrow has suffered an IT meltdown, forcing the cancellation of flights for a second day. At least 120 flights and 16,000 passengers are reported to have been affected. British Airways has apologised for the cancellations. Heathrow Airport says the airline is working to resolve a technical issue which coincides with a 3-day strike by security guards over pay. Well, our correspondent Li Jianhua is at Heathrow Airport for us. Li Jianhua, one of the busiest weekends of the year. What's the situation now?
Yes, Jamie, I'm at the Heathrow Airport, and behind me you don't see a lot of planes coming into the airport or flying out of it. It is supposed to be the most hectic day ever since the pandemic erupted in December 2019. Imagine that the bank holiday is rolling around together with the half-term break, when the families are planning some wonderful trips out of the country with some of the top destinations, including Dublin, Amsterdam and Palma. But now some of the dreams have been dashed because of the British Airways tech issues on Thursday. As you said just now, around 16,000 passengers have been affected. That means around over 120 flights being cancelled, and many of the affected passengers are still waiting for notice from the British Airways. The British Airways released a statement this morning saying that due to high call volumes, please contact us if you are due to travel in 48 hours. And affected passengers now can either get a refund or they can rebook their tickets with the British Airways or an alternative carrier. Of course, the affected passengers, over 16,000 of them, are not happy with what is happening, and they vent their anger on social media. This one on Twitter, it is named Not the 20%. He or she is saying, no help with getting flights, no info, no help with hotels. Your job is not just to fly people out, but actually help when things don't go as you would wish. And another Twitter user said, come on, BA, you can do much better than this. You are supposed to be the UK's flagship.
Yeah, lots of angry people by the sound of it. Do you sense this is a one-off, or are we expecting a summer of air trouble?
Jamie, British Airways is known for its strong reputation for safety. It is ranked within the top 20 safest airlines globally. But now, recently, over the past few years, it has been affected by a number of IT issues. Remember, in December last year, a tech issue led to some long-haul cancellations, and in the summer of 2017, around this time, because of a major computer system failure, around 75,000 passengers were stranded. And earlier we talked to a travel expert, Paul Charles, who said that travellers in the summer may experience small delays.
But sadly, I think this summer and in the next few weeks, as we're already seeing, for us as passengers, we're going to continue to delays, cancellations for various reasons, partly due to staff shortages across the aviation network, but also due to the inability of infrastructure to keep up with this higher demand. You've not seen the infrastructure invested in as strongly as it was pre-pandemic in the last few years. And so the infrastructure is creaking at the seams.
Yeah, Jamie, I would say that the biggest issue for British Airways is the staff shortages. Because of COVID-19 in 2020, they reduced around 42,000 strong workforce, and in 2022, because of the increase in travelling now, so they are extremely short-staffed. And what is the motto of British Airways? This started from the world's favorite airline, but now it is to fly or to serve, but sometimes they fail to fly or to serve. Back to Jamie.
Li Jianhua, our correspondent at London's Heathrow Airport, thank you very much. French police have clashed with climate protesters outside the annual shareholder meeting of the energy giant Total Energies. Several hundred activists sat outside the venue in Paris attempting to block delegates' entry. Our correspondent Nathalie Malhas is in Paris. Nathalie, what do the activists want? What are their demands?
Jamie, we've seen many of these demonstrations here in Paris and around the world, with climate activists really raising their dissatisfaction in the way in which these oil majors and oil and gas companies go about their business, with, as they say, very little consideration about the human rights for the communities in which they operate, or the environmental rights for the areas in which they operate, and the extent at which they wreak havoc on the earth and contribute to climate change. So what campaigners are looking for, in fact, they were chanting slogans and brandishing placards that read "Total Assassin" and 1, 2, 3 degrees. We can thank Total for that, alluding to the fact that Total Energies, one of these major oil and gas companies that according to the climate activists, are contributing to the climate crisis that we are in. They also raised concern for the operations being carried out in areas like South Africa, Tanzania, Haiti, and Uganda. They want many of those operations to be stopped with immediate effect, and for the communities in which these major oil companies are operating to consult the communities and the residents where they are currently conducting anything from seismic surveys or a series of drilling activities.
Nathalie, many other oil companies in the world, why are they specifically targeting Total's AGM?
Only because that is happening today, Jamie. We heard from some of the protesters that they will continue with their action, and many of these NGOs and activists have actually released joint statements banding together against other big oil giants. For the moment, it's Total. They're in focus. They're hosting their AGM here in the French capital today, but that's not to say others like BP and Shell have been excluded or are considered to be any less of a danger to the earth, to the communities in which they operate. In fact, many of these NGOs have said they will continue with the legal action that they have against some of these oil companies. We've seen similar things play out in South Africa, for example, towards Shell, the oil company Shell, warning that they are not the only one that many of these NGOs will be targeting. They will continue to raise their dissatisfaction and demonstration and protest against the work being conducted by these oil majors.
Nathalie, thank you for that. Our correspondent Nathalie Malhas in Paris. Belgium and Iran have conducted a prisoner exchange mediated by Oman. The Belgian aid worker Olivier van der Kastelein was arrested during a visit to Iran last year and sentenced to 40 years in prison on charges including spying. The Iranian diplomat Asadollah Assadi was given a 20-year sentence in a Belgian court in connection with a foiled bomb plot in France. Both countries maintain the charges against their citizens were fabricated. A man has been arrested after opening the emergency door of an Asiana Airlines flight as it was preparing to land in South Korea. The plane, which was 200 meters above the ground and carrying nearly 200 passengers, landed safely, but 9 people were taken to hospital with breathing difficulties. Eyewitnesses say the man had tried to jump out of the open door, causing chaos on the flight. The first ever Bentley to complete the iconic Le Mans 24-hour race has been sold for over $3.5 million. Auctioned 100 years after the race was first run, it was the first British car to take part and came fourth. The vehicle fell into obscurity afterwards before being rediscovered in a barn in the UK in the 1980s. Trade ministers from the 21 APEC countries are meeting for talks in the US city of Detroit ahead of chairing a meeting of Asia-Pacific countries. American Trade Representative Katherine Tai said ministers are discussing the challenges of the global economy. CGTN's correspondent Hendrik Sybrandi reports.
Detroit, Michigan has long been known as the center of the U.S. automotive industry, so perhaps it's a fitting place for the 2023 APEC ministers responsible for trade meeting, which takes place here on Thursday and Friday. The 21-member Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization has been around for 3 decades, and its goal here in this meeting is to keep the world's economy rolling into an uncertain future. Global growth has been sluggish this year compared to last year, at least according to current projections, as the world's economy tries to get past the COVID-19 pandemic as well as the conflict in Ukraine. The U.S. and China, representing the world's 2 largest economies, obviously are big players in this. They've had a very tense relationship in a lot of different respects, but certainly with regards to the economy. Of course, the tariffs that the U.S. placed on China some 5 years ago have played a role in that. This past October, the U.S. limited the sale of semiconductors to China. It's also been working to help companies move their supply chains out of China as well. For its part, China has blocked the purchase of memory chips from Micron Technology. It did so, it said, on national security and cybersecurity grounds. It's also been conducting raids and investigations of foreign firms working in China. The U.S. calls that a policy of economic coercion. China, on the other hand, says the U.S. has been engaging in Cold War mentality. There is an effort now to resume the dialogue between the 2 countries. President Joe Biden has referred to this as a potential thaw in the relations between the 2 countries. More meetings have been taking place, certainly in an unofficial capacity. China has said it's open for business, but clearly the animosity and distrust between the U.S. and China remains very high. China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao is in the U.S. for several key meetings, a meeting on Thursday with U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, and then a meeting on Friday with U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai. The Thursday meeting is in Washington. The Friday meeting is here in Detroit. And that could go a long way to setting the tone between the 2 countries and helping determine whether more meetings will be held between top officials in the U.S. and China in the future. Friday's meeting may be as important as anything that's discussed here. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization, in many ways, hinges on U.S.-China cooperation, which has been less than optimal after some very turbulent years. Hendrik Sybrandi, CGTN, Detroit.
A new sleeper train service has launched linking Berlin to Brussels. The service by the Dutch startup European Sleeper is the first night train to link the 2 capitals in 15 years. Our correspondent Alex Cadier was on board.
Could this be the future of European travel? Berlin to Brussels via Amsterdam in 12 hours overnight. A new Belgian and Dutch railway startup is bringing back sleeper trains as a greener alternative to flying. The service makes 6 stops between Berlin and Brussels, including Amsterdam, Rotterdam and Antwerp. This is the first sleeper train between Berlin and Brussels for over a decade. I think we should go have a look inside. We're staying in the second-tier cabins available on this service. These carriages have been repurposed for this particular journey. Now, these particular cabins that you'll see shortly sleep 4 people quite comfortably in a shared cabin. Let's just have a look inside here. As you can see, these cabins are completely private and they sleep 4 people on 2 levels. Up here, top deck, and down here, these seats can be repurposed into a bed as well. Now, you have a small table just underneath here and everything you need to sleep. Duvet, pillow, all provided as part of the journey. Tickets here start at around $110. European Sleeper offers 2 other comfort levels for passengers hoping to make the overnight trip. The most affordable option is a seated cabin, where 6 passengers share a compartment. This might not be the most comfortable choice, but booked in advance, it will only cost $75 from Berlin to Brussels. The train then offers passengers what the company calls deluxe sleepers, 3 passengers to a cabin with plush beds, a wash basin and plenty of storage space. Tickets for this top-of-the-range option start at around $200 per person, one way. The company's co-founder says this level of comfort is only the beginning.
We are already in the process of buying second-hand seating coaches, and we will completely refurbish them into modern night train coaches. So with more comfort, more modern look and feel, and also more privacy options.
The train has room for over 200 passengers across 10 carriages, with plenty of storage for luggage and a special compartment for bicycles.
I think it's very good that the night trains are returning, so it's a good initiative. On the shorter distance in Europe, I prefer the train. It's more comfortable, it's a little bit slower, and your mind travels along with your body.
Despite some positive feedback from its passengers, European Sleeper has its work cut out in order to convince passengers to swap the air for the rails. All in all, our trip from Berlin to Brussels was quite smooth, but the service remains a bit basic. Some of the carriages are quite old, second-hand, bought from the Slovakian railways, and comfort inside could be improved. But what's clear is that for passengers looking for a greener alternative to cross Europe, they've now found one. Alex Cadier, CGTN, in Brussels.
The headlines again. 2 people killed as Russian missiles hit a hospital in Ukraine in another night of airstrikes across the country. Our other headlines, China's Ukraine envoy arrives in Moscow for the latest round of talks aimed at trying to end the conflict. And travel chaos continues for a second day at London's Heathrow Airport after more than 100 British Airways flights are cancelled due to an IT failure. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to the weather forecast. I'm Jenny. Well, over to Europe. Clear skies is likely to take the dominance here for the majority from UK all the way towards into western Russia this Saturday. But notice that for the majority of the eastern half of Europe, it's likely to experience quite a lot of showers with potential thunderstorms setting the stage here for several locations down in the Balkans. And Sunday we'll see no big changes in the wet weather forecast. About the temperatures development over this weekend, and we can notice that there could see round of fluctuation in temperatures here for the majority of the western half of Europe, and rise first on Saturday, and then we'll see a slight cool down in high temperatures as we head into Sunday. So please dress up accordingly and keep your eyes closely on the latest temperature forecast. About business and travel for the major cities up in the north, and showers for Copenhagen, Stockholm in the morning hours on Sunday, with high temperatures touching the 20 degrees Celsius mark. And here over to Moscow, we'll also see chance of showers in the morning hours and some clear skies in the afternoon with high temperatures in the upper teens. And for other major cities across the western portion of Europe, Paris will see some cloudy conditions on Sunday with high temperatures about 26 degrees Celsius, and down in Madrid we'll see chance of showers in the morning hours with a high of 21, and overnight low temperatures will be about 11 degrees Celsius. And that is all from me. Stay tuned for more City Forecast.